Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Schickel Statistics Lecturing Series. And in this unit, this will be our first unit in this lecturing series. And in this unit, we're going to talk about the introduction of the probability. And we're going to have several videos associated with this topic, introduction of probability. So the first video, we're going to talk about counting rules, okay? And in the counting rules here, and we're going to talk about the two things in this video. First thing is we talk about the rule of the multiplication of choices. Then the second one, we're going to talk about what is the permutation. Now, under the permutation, we have two kinds of the permutation we're going to discuss. One is the circular permutation, and other one is the permutation with objects are not all distinct. That means they are not all different. How do we do the permutations here? And so in this series, in this video, and we're going to go over 6 problems about the rules of the multiplication of choices here. And so the multiplication of choices. Before we start this, I'd like to discuss what is the counting rules. Why, when we talk about the probability and we need the counting rules, what that means here, okay? Let me go to the whiteboard and let me show you here. Okay, so let's think about a very simple examples here. So for examples here, let's do a very simple ones here. So like, let's say here, everybody should know if you, for examples here, so if I toss a die, right? So if I toss dice, I'm going to have come out with 6 faces, right? So I'm going to have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I'm interested, what is the probability I'm going to get an even number? Right, so we know when you toss a die, the chance to get an even number, what is the even numbers here? That means you will get a 2, 4, and 6, right? So everybody saw this is kind of like a common sense. And then you say, hey, so the probability I'm going to get the even number, right? So out of total, how many? I have 6 in my sample space because I can count is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 outcomes, right? So this is the outcomes for her. So this is the outcome for my sample spaces here. That means that's the outcome for all the possible, the situation where I toss a die. And then we said, hey, the probability get an even number. We have 3, right? So it's a 3, right? So now we have the probability is 1/2. So the reason why this is 3, because I can count this. This is 1, 2, 3. I have 3 elements in this event I'm interested in, and I'm interested in is try to get even numbers here. So basically you can count it. And for this simple experiment, you can count it. But for some things here, so the reason why we need to use some of the counting rule, for examples here, if I try to make this experiment a little bit more complicated here, right? So if I said I'm going to withdraw 2 cards from a standard deck, right? So a standard deck of the card, we have 52 cards, right? So if you draw the 2 cards, if you want to list all the possible, so you can have like a S and S, right? So like maybe one is a club, one is diamond, and then so Then you can have a club like 1 and 2. You can have a king and a jack. So as you can see, for this situation, we have so many situations. And I cannot really write it out, every one of them, right? So I need to have some rule to help me, to check, to see, hey, instead of writing that out, I can use the formula, or I can use the counting rule, say, hey, out of this, how many situations I'm going to have, all right? So that's why we need to use that's why we're going to talk about the probability. We're going to discuss what is the counting rules here, because for most of the experiment, I probably have a difficulty to write down every element. So I need to know how to count it correctly by using some formulas to help us. All right. So that's why, we're going to talk about the two things in this video. One is we call is the rules of multiplication of choices. And then the next one we're going to talk about is the permutations here. So what is the rule of the multiplications? So that means, if you have, if you have the events here, okay. So if your experiment, okay, contains. So let me go back to our PowerPoint, so you will understand what I mean here, okay. So now let's take a look at what is the rule of the operation. So let's say if this experiment, or you can say this operation has this k step, and on each step, the first step you can be done in the N1 ways. For each of the second step, you can have N2 ways. So till the NK steps, right? So the total operation, or the total experiment, so the total how many ways this can be done, it will just be N1 times N2 times N3 ways. All right. So now let's take a look here. What that means here, right? So let's go back to the whiteboard here. So for examples here, if you go to, if you go to restaurant, they have 3 types of the salad, and they have 2 types of the soup, right? So, and then they have 4 types of the meat, right? So now you are going to order 1 salad, 1 soup, and 1 meat. So total, how many different way you can order it? So like in here, we can say, okay, for the salads here, right? I can order first one or second one. So I can order salad number 1, maybe is just the Caesar salad, and the salad number 2, maybe just the typical garden salads, and the salad number 3 is maybe some different salad. Then after you order the salad, so you have 2 choice of the soup, right? So you can say, hey, I'm going to use the soup 1, go with the salad 1, or salad 1 go with the soup 2. The same way, if you order the salad number 2, you can say, I'm going to use the soup to go with it, or like this one, right? Right, so this is the soup, right? So after you order the soup, and then what happened? You can have the first salad number 1, soup number 1, then you can have 4 different ways to order the different meats here, right? So you have 4 different ways, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what is the multiplication rules tell you? That means, total, you have how many is 3 times 2 times 4, and that will be 24. That means you can have 24 different meals, different meal combinations, right? So you can have a different salad, different soup, and a different meat. That's what we talk about is the different way, that's what we talk about is the rule of the multiplications here, all right? Okay, so now let's take a look at our first problems here. So if you have the notes, so make sure you kind of go back to our first problems here, all right? So the first problem, if you read the problems, they tell you, so suppose somebody, Okay, so let's go back to our first problem here. Okay, so the first problem is to tell you, suppose somebody want to go by bus, train, or plane or weekend's vacation to one of the 5 states. Is this person want to go to Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin? Find out how many different ways this can be done. All right. So now let's go back to here. Okay, so the way we do it is so that we say, okay, so I have 3 different ways I can go, right? So I can go by bus, train, or plane, right? So I can go by bus, train, or planes, right? And then for each one, you can go to the 5 states here, right? So each one, you can go to the 5 states here. Right, so total how many ways you can go here. So this trip can be carried out in how many different ways? Is 3 times 5, right? So that will be 15 different ways you can take this trip. So you can either decide you want to take a bus to the Indiana or a train to the Michigan. So you have 15 different ways you can do that. All right, that's what we call this a multiplication rule, because you have a case step. The first step is, you can choose which way you want to go. If you don't like to fly, you say, I'm going to take a bus. And then you can choose under the bus. The second steps here is you find the states, right? Okay, so now let's take a look at problem number 2 here. The problem number 2 is telling you is like this. They said, okay, so a quality control inspector wishes to inspect a part for inspection for each of the 4 different bins. And those bins contain 4, 3, 5, and 4 parts, respectively. How many different ways can she choose the 4 parts here? Okay, so let's take a look at what is this one's means here. So this one's means here, right? So the first bin here, right? So this is a bin number 1, right? So bin number 1 have how many different parts here? So bin number 1 here, right? So have 4 different parts. Then the bin number 2 here, right? How many parts here? I have like 3. So the same way that this is bin number 3. So how many parts here? I have 5 parts. And the bin number 4, how many parts here? I have 4 parts here, right? So you can pick out one, right? You pick out one. So how many different parts you can pick? 4. Then you can, after pick one, so you pick one from bin 2. How many different ways you can do? 3. How many different ways you can pick one from here? It's 5. How many different ones you can pick up here? It's 4, right? So total, how many parts, the way you can do this inspection, you can have 240 ways to do this inspections here. Is clear? Okay. So now, right? So that's kind of the pretty easy, right? Okay, so the problem number 3, okay. Okay, so let's take a look at the problem number 3 here. So the problem number 3 is will tell you in how many different ways can one answer all the questions of the truth and the false test containing 20 questions here. Okay, so like for this ones here, okay, so let's take a look. How can I do it, right? So let's go back to my whiteboard here. So it's problem number 3 here. So I have 20 questions here, right? So I have 20 questions here. So because this is truth and false, right? So for each question, so how many ways you can choose? Hey, I can only have 2 ways, right? So it's either choose truth or false if you randomly guess, right? So the second one, you can choose true and false. Third one, you can have 2 and false. So you have 2 ways here. So total, So then based on the rule multiplication, you times it. So how many different ways you can take this test here is 2 to the what? 20 powers, right? Because you have 20 questions here, because in here you have 20 questions here. All right, so the 2 to the 20, so if you put it into your calculator, it will give you 1048576. Okay, so that's what we call this rule of the multiplications, right? Okay, so now let's take a look a little bit the hard ones here, right? So let's go to the next, let's go to the next set, all right? Okay, so we do 3 more, then we're going to stop for this video, and then you can practice more questions, more problems by using the rule of multiplication. Okay, so now these ones here, they asked you, they said a student can study 0, 1, 2, or 3 hours for history test or any single given day. So how many ways the student can study at most? That means, what it means at most? That means no more than 4 hours, right? For the test, 2 consecutive days. Okay, so how many different ways? Okay, so let's take a look here. This one is pretty good problems here. All right, so let's go to have, and next page is here. Oh, right. Okay, so now let's see here, right? So in the statistic, one of the things you might want to know the different word, right? So when we talk about at most, so when they say at the most 4 hours, so when you see the word at the most, that means what? That means not more than, right? So not more than 4. Not more than 4 hours. So that means you can study all the way till 4, but you cannot exceed that, right? Okay, so let's take a look. This is problem number 4. Let's see how do we do that. Okay, so now let's take a look for the day ones, right? So they said the student cannot study more than 4 hours, and for the day ones, and also each day they can only study 0, 1, 2, or 3. So day 1, this student, let's take a look at these ones here. This is the day 1s, right? So the day 1, this student can study 0 hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours, correct? Okay, now I'm going to the day 2s here, right? So this is the day 2. Okay, so for day 2s here, okay, think about here, right? So when the students study the 0 hour in the day 1, so how many situations in the day 2 can have? The student can study the 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So the day 1 is 0 hour, day 2 is 3 hours, still is less than 4, so it's good. How about if the student study the day 1 in the 1 hour? So how many hours day 2 this student can study? It will be 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So 1 and 3, so it's a total 4 hours. That's okay, it's meet the requirement. Okay, now let's take a look at these ones here. Okay, so like if the student study the 2 hours in the day 1, then the day 2, the student can still study 0 hour, 1 hour, and 2 hours, right? So I cannot study 3 hours because at most it's only 4. So it's 2 plus 2 is 4. So I only have 3 situations here. Okay, so now let's take a look at these ones here, right? So for these ones here, right? So if the student studies 3 hours, then on the day 2 can only study the 0 hours, right? Or 1 hours, right? So they cannot study 2 hours because if you study 2 hours, will be what? So there will be more than that. So now you just totally you add it. So how many situations you have? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right. So if you summation that, so you know this one will be total. You have 13 different ways to study. Okay, now, if you take a look at the problem number, if you take a look at the problem number 5 here, right? Okay, so if you take a look at the problem number 5, and so here, so the number 5 here, let's take a look here. Okay, so, okay. So the number 5 here, so let's say it's the same thing. A student can study 0, 1, 2, 3 hours. And how many ways student can study? At most 4 hours and on 3 consecutive days. Okay, so I'm increasing this to 3 consecutive days here. All right, so let's take a look here, right? Okay, so now, okay, so I'm going to here, so this will be, I'm going to change this one to number 5, right? Okay. Okay, so for the number 5 here, right? So the number 2 is still the same here, right? Okay, so number 2 is still the same. Okay, so now day 2 is the same. Okay, now I'm going to do, okay, so this one's here. Okay, so be careful here. This is 0s here. Okay, so now I'm going to the day 3s here. Okay, so for the day 3s here, right? So instead of writing out the tree diagram, I really cannot write it out because I cannot draw anymore. So for the day 3s here, so for this branch, like 0, 0 here, right? So how many situations I can have here? I will have what? I will have 4 different situations, right? So because I did not study on the day 1, day 2, so day 4, day 3, I can have 0, 1, 2, 3. So day 3 here have 4 situations. All right, so now for these ones here, 0, 1, so how many day 3 here I have? I also have what? 4, right? I can study for the 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Because 0, 1, 3 is still less than 4. Okay, let's take a look at this one, the 0, 2, right? So for the 0, 2, okay, so that means 0, I studied 2 hours. So how many here I have here? I'm going to have 3, right? Why? Because I'm going to have 0, 1, and the 2s, right? So here I can study 0, 1, 2, 3, and this is 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so how about the 0, 3s here? 0, 3, I only have 2 situations, right? Because I can only have studied 0 hour and 1 hour, because 1 hour plus 3 is what? It's 4 hours, right? So the same way here, like 1, 0. Okay, so how many I can study the 1, 0? So if you do the same way, 1, 0, how many I'm going to have? I'm have 4 different ways to study the 1, 0, right? Because it's 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 1, how many ways I have? Is 3 ways, right? So 1, 1 is 0, 1, 2. Okay, so 1, 2. Okay, so this is 1, 2, right? So 1, 2, how many ways I have? I have 2 ways, right? 1, 2, because I have 0, 1, and that's it, right? Because 1 plus 2 is already 3. 1, 3, right? 1, 3, I can only have 1 way. That means I'm studying 0 hours here. Okay, so let's do the 2, 0. 2, 0, this one's here will be how many? 3s, right? Then 2, 1, how many is here? 2, 1 half is 2. Then 2, 2 is what? It's 1 ways, right? That's the 0 ways, right? So this is a 2, 1. Why is it have 2 way? I have a 0, 1, right? Okay, so you can do the same way. The 3, 0, how many ways here I have is 2, right? 3, 1. How many way I have here is 1, right? So now, if you add all this together, so you add all this together, so what you can have here, so your summation here is 30, what? 32. That means you have a total 32 different ways, to study at most 4 hours, spreading out to 3 days. See, right? So it's just, that's what is the multiplication rules. And this is not a totally multiplication rules, but you need to kind of break it down a little bit more careful there. Okay. Okay. So now let's take a look at our last province here. So the last province here is, okay, so it's number 6. And then we're going to start this video. So on the August 31st, there are 5 wild card teams in the American League that can make it to the playoff. And only 2 will win the spot. Then I want to draw a tree diagram which show the various possible playoff wild cards here, right? Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Okay, so this will be our last province here. Okay, so in here, okay, so for this province here, it tells us I have 5 teams, right? So I have 5 teams here. I'm going to, the makeup, the only 2 will be able to make the win the spot, right? So we want to see the possible, the playoff teams here. So like the first one is here, right? So you can choose. Okay, so let's try to do here to see we'll be able to. The first team you can choose could be, A, right? Okay, after you choose A, what is the other wild card you can have? You can have a B, C, D, E, right? So you have a 5 team. Or you can say, okay, the first one, I'm going to choose what? I'm going to choose B. Okay, if you go to choose B, you really don't, because here, if you say AB is here, right? But the AB is already included in the first situation. So in here, you only have differences in the wild card will be BC, BD, and BE, right? All right, so now you say I'm going to choose C. Okay, so for C, obviously you cannot choose CA or CB because these 2 is already included in the previous one. So that's why. So if the here is C, what you can only have, you can have a D and the E here. So then the other 2 like a D, is already covered. D covered by the A, D covered by the B, D covered by the C. So I don't have the D's here. The same way is E, I don't have, right? So total, how many different wild cards playoff you can have? So you add them together. So how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So you can have how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you will have 9 different ways, to draw the wild card, play cards here, right? So it's AB, AC, AD, AE, or BC, BD, BE, or CD, CE, right? You don't have any other combinations here. Okay, so that's it. And so this is what we call how to use the tree diagrams and try to, identify the different ways. And also, we talk about the rule of the multiplications. Is so the last 3 problems here is a little bit deviated from the rule of multiplication because they do give the restrictions. So that's why the tree diagram is kind of pretty helpful. Okay, so we're going to stop the first video here. Then the next ones here, we're going to talk about the other counting rules. That's what we call is the permutation. Okay, so we're going to talk about the circular permutation, regular permutation, and the permutation with odd number. They are not all different. All right, so that's it. and for this video. And so like, I hope that you will like this video if you like it. And don't forget to subscribe my channel. And also, if you're still confused or you have questions, please leave a comment and I will try to answer your question. Very nice to talk to you and looking forward to talk to you for about the permutations. Okay, bye.